My name is Giles Palmer, and I'm joined by people in the IVF world today who have a vested interest in the future. That's namely the embryologists and people in that industry. Don't forget, this is two-part, so there's a different time zone to reach more people who usually can't see the session at the time we're doing now. It'll be a continuation. There'll be new talks on the similar and same subjects for that. So it's a great honor to be co-moderating this with Andrew Thomson and the others who I'll introduce now. We'll dispense with all the long bios and the contact information and bios you'll find on the website, which I mentioned before. But people who are supporting this session tonight are Bill and Debbie Venier from West, that's World Embryology Skill and Training, that's a center there, training embryologists. Dr. Gloria Calderon and Nuno Costas Borges from Embryo Tools. Hi there, Gloria. Eva Schenkman from Art Lab, a training center in the US. TJ Farnsworth, CEO and founder of Inception, the largest group of IVF clinics in North America. Alison Campbell, Dr. Alison Campbell from Care Fertility in the UK, and a long-time supporter of I3, Dr. Tony Anderson, who was one of the first members of I3, always supporting us, and a founder of course, IVF Academy USA, and embryo director, IVF Academy. So, take it away, Bill. With your mute off, perhaps, if you could.
Help, yeah, that would help. Thank you all for joining. I guess we'll get started right away, yeah? As you well know, our profession is going through a demographic shift in the workforce, together with a perceived shortage worldwide of access to trained embryologists and availability of aspiring embryologists. I3 would like to involve you in a double webinar starting right now on the topic of recruitment and employment of embryologists. Our profession is undergoing serious changes. The demands and roles of the clinical embryologists are changing drastically. It is more automated, regulated, and administrative, rich workplace, creating a two-tier profession of scientists versus technicians. It seems that everyone is hiring or trying to hire, and is leading to an escalating trend of high salaries, while junior embryologists are finding difficulties to find work. But our profession is not often promoted. So let's hear the first of our origin stories.
I ask every one of my students that come through, how did you get into embryology? Me personally, I started into embryology through I started out in the bovine world where I was doing embryo transfer and cloning of embryos. Just started applying to human IVF labs. I didn't care where it was. I got my foot in the door and just started building my career from there. And ironically, when I was leaving the animal world, I actually had people tell me that I would never make it in the human world as an embryologist. And I was really cautious and hesitant to come in. I think I've done pretty well so far.
I first discovered it when I was doing my master's research project. I learned about whatever embryology existed, and then I worked hard to get into the field and discovered how difficult it was to get into. Through doing the literature review, I kind of figured out what embryology was.
I was at uni, and it was the last year when I had a subject related to IVF, laboratories and all the techniques. So I love it, and then I decided to study a master's in reproduction.
My story is that it fell into my lap, quite literally. I was working on my undergraduate's degree, and I attended the University of Georgia, and I was going to the career fair. I knew I wanted to do something in medicine. I didn't quite have a path paved yet, but I went to a career fair, and there was a clinic who was looking for egg donors from college students. So they gave me their information and I gave them my resume, and I got a call from Thomas Elliott.
Was a biology major, and I wasn't sure which direction I was going to go. And there was a reproductive biology center with LSU, Louisiana State, near my home. So I actually drove there and volunteered my time. And then they invited me in to be a graduate student. And I knew that, obviously training was done, or at least research was done in animals before human. And so I went into the animal model first, knowing that I would go into human IVF. I go speak, and there's a lot of people that don't know that it exists.
Mine was, I did a lot of mouse IVF and hadn't really considered human IVF until my PI at the time, when I was doing my second postdoc, sent me on a 6-week course called Frontiers in Reproduction at Woods Hole. And that's where I met loads of REIs. And I was initially sent there so I could get some sort of research projects to start my own lab. And then I came out of it going, I don't want to start my own research lab. I want to go into clinical IVF and do embryology. And that really was a very pivotal moment for me.
I grew up on a farm, knew about IUI, although I didn't really know that it was called that. And after my bachelor's, had no idea what I was going to do. And Nate Oloskotov gave a lecture at my small college in Southern Michigan on assisted reproduction for preservation of exotic and endangered species. And I had worked at a zoo through high school, grew up on a farm. And so did an internship out there to do a senior research thesis, and was introduced to the research side of things. And it was during my master's degree at Purdue with Rebecca Kreischer that I was introduced to Michelle Lane and David Gardner. And that's when I first learned about kind of human assisted reproduction. And so that prompted me to then go on to do my PhD and kind of, I guess, try to emulate Michelle and David in terms of research, but also a foot in the realm of clinical IVF.
I learned about embryology in undergraduate. I did an internship as basically a cattle embryologist. And then I worked I graduated my undergrad, and then I worked in the cattle industry for 2 years doing embryo transfer, and then ran a bovine IVF lab after that. And then I got really tired of all of the midnight calls to collect oocytes from a dead cow and being dirty all the time. And so I decided to go back to school to get my master's and transition into human IVF. And then from there, it snowballed into my PhD. So
you never know who you're impacting. So just opening it up to people. What's really interesting is, hiring people from the animal world these days. When I was doing animal, I've actually talked to some people when they find out that I'd have the training, they want to get into the human world. They actually started paying a lot of these animal embryologists better. I probably doubled my pay going from animals to humans, but a lot of the animal embryologists, bovine embryologists, they're paying them fairly well. And so for them to get into human embryology, they'd probably almost take a cut in pay unless you're willing to pay them comparably to what they're making in the animal world. And most of these people in doing bovine embryo transfer, bovine cloning, are probably making what a 3 or 4 year embryologist is making. So you got to start them out there, yet you still got to teach them how to do retrievals.
Okay, now on to our first speaker. Are you there, Gloria? Okay, so we'll now move on, shall we? Let's hear from our first
I'm
speaker.
here.
Would you like to introduce Eva?
Yeah, but I cannot, I cannot turn my video. Okay, now. Welcome everybody to this lovely IVF meeting, and let's move on, and let's move on with this session. And so let us hear from our first speaker, who has recently opened a training center in the USA, ART Lab, to set the scene. It is my great pleasure to introduce to all the audience Eva Schenkman, and she's going to give us a talk about staffing current demands and current demands. Eva, when you are ready.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Gloria. And thank you, Giles, for inviting me here today. I'm happy to talk about such an important topic that definitely affects us all. Changing landscape of training, recruiting, and retaining new embryologists. First, apologies just on my hoarseness, just recovering from a recent bout with COVID. So just kind of getting back on my feet. First, disclosures. I am a business and scientific consultant for Mellowwood Medical and their EMR ideas. I am, as Gloria mentioned, the founder of Art Lab, an IVF skills training center located near Raleigh, North Carolina in the US. And I'm also on the scientific advisory board for Art Compass. So briefly, to talk just a few short objectives of what I'm going to talk about today. First, we'll be discussing some of the causes of the current staffing shortages. Second, what is the future demand for IVF looking like? Is it going to continue to increase? Forecast any slowdowns? And then finally, what are the strategies for addressing the current staffing shortage that we're all experiencing? So to kind of review, I'm sure obviously it comes as no shock to anybody on this call today, but there seems to be a bit of shortage of skilled embryologists in our field right now. And I think, one main reason for the lack of, incoming trained embryologists, at least definitely here in the US, is, lack of educational training, especially in the undergraduate field. There are very few undergraduate programs that exist. And as you saw from the video, a lot of the original embryologists came from animal science world, which is myself, where I came from and how I got into human IVF. But I think what you'll find is one trend among those videos is a lot of us just kind of stumbled into it. And I think that's an unfortunate thing that we have here in the US. Most of the education programs are master's level, and they don't offer much hands-on training for IVF. As we all, I think, agree, there's been a clear increase in the demand for IVF. And not only has there been an increase in demand for IVF, but also in the complexity of the cases over the years. When I first started out, there wasn't, PGT and freeze-alls and all of these other, add-ons that are now routine. Freeze-all for many of us has become the norm. And this, further ever increases our workload. So not only is our workload more, our increased time pressure and the push to do more in less time, not to mention, the worry and the stress about handling human materials and not making a mistake. So, how did we kind of get to the state that we're in? And I think, typically, at least how I was trained, embryologists, at least in the US, have been trained in an apprentice type program. And, that's something that becomes harder and harder to do. The increased caseload at clinics has left little time to train. And, this type of training system is often inconsistent, not only in how, different lab directors or different technicians, teach the fundamentals, but it can lead to an often lengthy, prolonged training period. And, I did a survey a month or so ago on the Mavericks page, and it's quite routine to find a training period that'll be 2, 3, 4 years or even more is currently considered normal. And this not only leaves, trainees, but also, your burned out staff frustrated as well. So, what about the embryologists that are also leaving the field? I think that's something that's important to address. And I know TJ is going to go more into retaining staff, but the key into addressing the shortage is not just tapping into a new resource of trainees, but we must be better at retaining the talent that we have. And, first, what I hear is the most common reason for embryologists to leave the field is burnout. And, this is, driven mainly by tough demands on our schedule, getting more done in less time, sacrificing much of our work-life balance that we have. And, the other is second is just timing. That first generation of embryologists that were senior embryologists when I started out about 30 years ago, they're starting to retire. One impact either of these, whether the retirement or burnout has been affected by COVID, I think is is debatable. You know, it's probably hard to tell, but I certainly think the pandemic just added a whole different layer of stress that we weren't expecting. And I'm sure in some respects that contributed to decisions by some to leave the field, you know, sooner rather than later. And I just want to touch briefly on the effect of kind of an overburdened lab. You know, they are struggling to keep up with their work, let alone train new staff properly in a timely fashion. And this was just a questionnaire study that was done by some of the Spanish embryologists. And what I just thought was stark was 45% of them reported as having, you know, frequent headaches. Over 90% reported having musculoskeletal problems, with about 95% issues with their arms or carpal tunnel, almost 77% reporting back problems, and about 71%, you know, reporting neck problems. And unfortunately, only 35% of the embryologists in the study thought that they would still be doing the job until retirement. So, you know, I often hear some make comments that this new generation is different, not willing to put up with the same stresses that we did in our career. And, you know, honestly, I don't know if I can fault them. I think, you know, today's embryologists, if they feel they're treated bad or undervalued or overworked, you know, they're typically just going to leave, you know, not necessarily put up with that kind of environment for an extended period of time. And, you know, studies have shown that overall workplace stress does lead to an increase of about 50% higher voluntary turnover. You know, and this increased turnover, especially when it's taking years to train, you know, a new embryologist, is only going to serve to make everything worse. Turnover costs associated with recruiting, training, lower productivity, and lost expertise are significant. You know, according to, you know, one study at the Center for American Progress, and, you know, this wasn't, you know, applying to embryologists, but just overall, but they average that it can cost at least 20% of a person's salary to replace them. And I'd probably argue in our field, that's probably, those costs are probably higher. So there's always, you know, another fear, and this I just pulled from the HFEA, and this was that our short-staffed lab may also be more likely to have a catastrophic error or a mix-up. And, you know, that may be stressing a lot of your current staff. And while, you know, this headline does involve a clinic in the UK, it's from quite some time ago, I think about 20 years ago, but it's something that we need to be cognizant of, that the staffing shortage just isn't a burden on our staff, but this may in fact lead to significant impact on our patients as well. So, you know, we keep saying this increased demand is driving this need for more workers, you know, but is this increased demand going to stop? And this study that just came out last month by Brand Essence Research actually indicates quite the opposite, and that not only are we seeing an increase, but that this increase is forecasted to grow even further. And the CAGR, the compound annual growth rate, is projected to maintain an increase of about 8.7% over the next 6 years. So not only do we really have to start, you know, thinking hard about a mechanism in place to meet our current staffing needs, but the future ones, you know, as well, that this is going to continue to be an issue for us. So, you know, main piece of the strategy to address staffing demands, I think, as you'll see about all of our presenters here today, is partnering with an IVF training school. And IVF, you know, training centers can offer a structured, intensive program. The training will be consistent, can even be customized according to your laboratory protocols in many of these centers. And this process will accelerate your current training process, you know, significantly shortening that period to get new embryologists on board. And, you know, this allows training schools to be the ones that can reach out to local colleges, local universities, establish those relationships, and they can also provide paid and unpaid internships to students as well. And they have the time to not only teach the needed skills, but also to teach that basic knowledge as well as critical thinking and troubleshooting skills. And it allows the candidates to master these skills at their own pace. So I think, most of the training centers organized in a very similar fashion. They're going to offer either short, courses ranging from several days to 1 to 2 weeks, or some are even offering longer intensive training programs. And this allows students enough hands-on experience to be able to become proficient in a pretty rapid manner. I know typically in a 1-week session, I have students do a minimum of 100 oocytes for ICSI. If, they're quite quick studies, they can even, keep going. I think one of my recent students for embryo biopsy, she caught on, very quickly. And I think by the end of the week was up to almost 200 embryos that she was able to biopsy by the end of the week. So, the longer, more intensive courses as well will really allow students to learn all aspects of IVF, ranging from andrology, basic embryology skills, dish prep, embryo culture, vitrification, ICSI, and of course, embryo biopsy. So, I think different centers have also adopted different methods for making these courses affordable for their clinics and their trainees, because at the end of the day, that's also something we have to discuss, is how do we get this done, and how do we get this done in a way that it's affordable, not only for the clinics, but also for trainees that may not have the support of a clinic sending them to us for training. One of the things I just wanted to point out that I'm doing at my center, which I'm pretty excited about, is I was able to build my training center an economic revitalization zone. It's a sustainability project, modernizing a former 200-year-old cotton mill to a state-of-the-art place that not only has where you can live, but work, as well as play and enjoy yourself. And this project combines not only the historic nature of the site, which is interesting in and of itself, but it completely runs on green energy. We generate our own hydroelectric power, and we're producing an environmentally conservative, green, sustainable campus. So all of our electricity is generated on site, and anything we don't use goes back to the grid. So these significant savings is one way that I've been able to pass that on to the clinics, as well as the students that I'm working with. I think we can all agree that positive work cultures are more pleasant, to work in. We probably all worked in some good labs, as well as some toxic labs. But, a positive work culture is also one that's more productive. A high stress environment is harmful to productivity and profitability. And TJ is going to speak more on staff retention ideas, but I just wanted to highlight a few key points, which is, according to a Queen's School of Business study in the UK in 2015, they looked at organizations with low employee engagement scores. And what they found is that places that had, on average, 18% lower productivity rate also had, lower profitability rate, and disengaged workers were more than 60% likely to make errors. And now just think about if we, bring that data potentially over into our field, and what impact, that can have, unfortunately on some of our patients. The last thing I wanted to talk about before we open it up just for some questions is always keep in mind is that as clinics and clinicians, that we should be utilizing the latest technologies to free up time for our current staff. We are currently using critically short resources to be able to perform many redundant and clerical and administrative duties. And staff that is currently short-staffed is already making trade-offs between administrative and clinical duties, let alone having free time to train. And I think, incorporating the latest technological innovations will allow embryologists to work more efficiently and forward-thinking. I know Phil Marsh recently at UCSF did a study on their incorporation of time-lapse into a very busy IVF center. And they were able to save the equivalent, about one full-time equivalent an embryologist by doing so. And, one of my favorite quotes that I do need to attribute to David Mortimer is for us to strive to work smarter and not just work harder. All right. And with that, I just summarized a few bullet points here. About our current shortage is not going to go anywhere. It's not just a short-term, bandage that we need to fix. And, propose that partnering with training programs in your area and your country, I think will go a long way to help ease that burden. All right. Thank you.
Absolutely brilliant, Eva. Truly inspirational and a really good idea about how to populate with the next sort of generation of embryologists and get them trained up to speed. There's one question from Rick Slifkin in New York, and that is, to what extent does the technology fit to lessen the burden on embryologists? We know that the pre-genetic testing programs and the freeze-alls have increased the workload, but what about offsetting that with digital witnessing and chain of custody programs or more advanced EMRs?
Absolutely. I think, that definitely is area, not only time lapse, more advanced EMRs, also getting all these different pieces of equipment to speak to each other. So if you've got an advanced EMR and you have an embryoscope and you have electronic witnessing, that, we need to really work hard to be able to get all of these different systems speaking in a very efficient way with each other. And I don't think that there's any system out there that does that yet to the point where they excel in that. So, I definitely agree with Rick on that. So part of what I've done at my training center, it is a fully functioning mock IVF lab, is to have, I have electronic witnessing, I have time lapse, I have EMRs that we're working with, is to really also use it as a testing ground to be able to get these systems working better together. And hopefully that pushes all of us forward.
Great. So next up, we have a man who needs no introduction for those in North America. He operates the largest group of clinics, and that is TJ Farnsworth from Inception. Over to you, TJ.
Great. Thanks, Andrew. Thank you to all the i3 team for having me back. It's always a great opportunity to get a chance to talk to everyone. For those of you that don't know me, I stumbled upon this industry as a patient, and I am ever appreciative of all the work that each one of you do for patients like me in order to get us on our pathway to parenthood. This past weekend was in the U.S. Father's Day, and so it's always a time for me to think about what it is we're doing as an industry and the families that wouldn't be there without us. So thank you to all of you for that. What I wanted to talk about today is really, how do you create pathways for our embryologists and what I'll just refer to as the scientists in the lab, enterologists and embryologists, to be supportive of them both professionally and personally, so that you can retain them and you can create a career path and an environment to work in that they're all passionate about. Because everyone, I think, in this industry is passionate about the mission of what they're doing on a macro level, but it's also really important for everyone personally on the personal level to be in a place that they feel appreciated and rewarded. So I think you got to think of this in two different components, both the professional pathway and the personal pathway. And we as an organization, we're in 30 markets across North America, almost 80 clinics now, and I'll just be honest with you, we have not always done a great job at this. And I think that's not a knock to us. That's just industries in general. It's us as clinics in general. I think it's important to recognize that in order to be able to improve upon it. And starting with the professional pathway conversation first, I think you've got to create an environment where embryologists, we talked about this a minute ago, the junior embryologists feel like, okay, there's no pathway for me in my career. You've got to create a pathway around that. And so, we look to our lab steering committee, which is a representative body of all the lab directors across North America who are part of our network, to start to define what does it mean to be, what are the skills in which we define as embryologist 1, embryologist 2, embryologist 3, and the lab director. And we actually shed the terms junior and senior, are working to do that at the recommendations of our lab directors. And what does it mean to be each one of those things? What are the types of qualifications necessary to move up to the next level for those embryologists who are keen on doing that, and then creating pathways for it? Because as Eva mentioned, we're not going to see less cycles and less cases, and we're either going to be forced with making the decision of reducing the volume of our clinics, which thereby will reduce access to care, which is something I don't think any one of us feels is the right decision, or we're going to have to figure out how to work smarter, as Eva said. And the problem in the labs is the amount of time that the team has in order to spend training somebody up. And so we've had great success with partnering with the offsite training schools to, to say, okay, what are the skills that are needed? This embryologist needs to have biopsy skills in order to make the next level. What does that mean for their compensation? What does that mean for them? And then let's get them there. Let's get them in a dedicated training environment. So it would have taken months and sometimes even years in a live lab environment. They're able to do in a matter of weeks in a dedicated training environment, which creates an amazing path, career pathway for those of our embryologists who are really, really focused and interested in that. And then you have to create opportunities where people see those jobs availability. So, by virtue of our size and scale, we have labs of various different sizes. And you've got to create an environment where people see there's an opportunity for a job opening for me as an embryologist 2, and then as a 3, and for somebody who wants to pursue their HCLD, go be a lab director. Where is there a pathway for that? And we're able to, just by our sheer size and scale, offer those opportunities. But I think it's incumbent upon all clinics in our industry to be able to create clear guidelines for what somebody can make those advancements in their career, those which they want to. And look, we're going to have embryologists in our labs that are content with where they are in their career, and we've got to be supportive of that as well. And then, in addition to those professional components, I think the personal pieces are as important as ever. And because I do think that we've reached a point at which, money isn't all that matters. And so, moving up in their career, making more money, those types of things, we've created some guidelines on what compensation looks like for each different type of level of embryologists, as I think most clinics have. But I think that there's a point at which the money isn't enough, and there's got to be that personal component. And so, we've found, more often than I'd like to say, labs that, the only time that the embryologists get time off is during the shutdown period, which is just not an appropriate work-life balance. People, you lose productivity. The comments that Eva was making are very real in terms of workforce engagement. We have begun to every quarter measure all of our employees, including our embryologists, on employee engagement, and get real-time feedback from them as to what it is that we could be doing to better support them, whether it be technology or training or whatever. And I think pushing people to time off and having the appropriate staffing levels to be able to support them. I think a lot of the reason why embryologists don't take time off, time to themselves, times with their families, is because they feel like, I can't leave the lab, I can't leave my coworkers, I can't leave, we're so busy. And you got to push them to do it, because the reality is, as a recharged person is more productive, less mistakes, and creates a better work-life culture for all of them that are around them. And then I think you've also got to create an environment where you're supportive of mental health support. We've started a new initiative internally led by our Chief Compassion Officer, Dr. Ali Domar, who trying to get people to recognize the stress that's caused all of us. I mean, listen, this past couple of years has been incredibly stressful in a lot of ways for everyone. Global pandemics and impending recessions and wars. It makes everyone raw, and I think it's important to be able to teach people the coping tools associated with stress, how to work with each other, how to work with our coworkers in a way in which it is constructive and creates that positive cultural environment. And I think that those types of components coupled together creates an environment where people want to be there, want to be worked, they feel supported, they feel like there's a scenario where they can take time off, they can take time to themselves, they can recharge. They feel like there's an environment by which they can progress in their careers, they can progress professionally, and they feel both supported in their careers, and they feel supported personally. And I think that's what we're all striving towards, or we should be. I mean, we as an organization certainly are, and I think that our peers are as well. Because the truth of the matter is that what Eva was commenting on earlier about the 8.7% compound annual growth rate that we're going to see, that's on the low end, from my opinion. We're not going to see a reduction in services. I think there's going to be increasing demand, even if a recession comes, where demand is going to continue to come. And we've got to create an environment where this is a career path that people want to pursue. You know, if we are really going to, create a scenario where, access to reproductive health services is a right for patients, then we've got to create a scenario where it's cost effective, it's affordable. And the only way to do that is to increase the supply to meet the demand. And so reducing services in our clinics is not going to get us there. And I think we've got to create an environment where we can bring embryologists into the industry, create a pathway for them to excel, and create an environment where they're not feeling overworked and overstressed. I think some of the statistics that Eva used were fantastic, because the truth is that's what's happening. I mean, we've got embryologists in our labs, every one of us does, that is overworked and stressed and feels like they can't take time off. They feel like they can't take time to themselves. And honestly, it's not necessarily always about taking a 1-week vacation, although that would be nice. And I think that should be supported. It's also about just taking a day off here and there and having the appropriate staffing levels in order to support the people to go do that. And they'll come back more recharged, more energetic, reduce the potentials for mistakes. And I just think all of these things together are really critical and important to creating an environment where, where people want to come work with us, they want to stay with us, they see an opportunity for creating a legacy within this industry. And they're not part of the 70% or 65 or 70% that Eva was quoting that don't see themselves in this industry long term. So I think those are the important key components from my perspective in terms of bringing the talent in that we want. And retaining the talent once we've got them here. Any questions anybody's brought to the table at this point? The question and answer part's my favorite. In addition to the fact that I really want to go work at Eva's offices, I think that they look beautiful and awesome. So.
TJ, thanks for your input on this. Love to hear you talk all the time. You hit the nail on the head on a lot of this stuff. I think we're going to do more Q&A towards the end. But my initial kind of question on kind of short statement is most of us older ones, this was born out of love and grew from there. We didn't really consider it a job. We did what we had to do to make this work. But we did have provisions in place where you weren't allowed to work beyond a certain amount of days. That has been lost. But we need to regain that. And it sounds like you offer a lot in your organization, which is great. My question is, where should we start this pathway? Should we be going to high schools and possibly speaking, in the science class, biology class? Where should we start?
Yeah, look, listen, for a whole lot of reasons, I think it would be a great idea to start in high schools and go teach people about human reproduction. So it's basically what's ever taught at schools, at least in the US, is how not to have human reproduction. And so I think educating people, I got to be honest with you, the level of the frequency at which I talk about, what I do for a living, and people come to me and talk about, our industry, there's very little knowledge and understanding amongst the young generation around what's done in the lab and how cool it is. And so I do think there's starting at education as early as possible, especially, high school would be great, but certainly getting to the biology students at university and making sure they see this as a career path and understand that this is a maturing industry that has a real opportunity for them to have a real fruitful career.
Awesome. All right, well, we're going to move on. Again, there'll be more Q&A at the end. And now we're going to travel across the pond to get their perspective. I'm going to introduce Andrew Thomson to you. Andrew is one of the most highly decorated embryologists in the UK. And besides being the director of embryology for the CRGW group, he is a teacher of embryologists in the UK and is founder of IVF SAS, offering advice to clinics. Andrew, set the scene for what happens in the UK.
I'll go through very, very briefly how all the different organizations, so we've got the Academy of Healthcare Science, the Association of Clinical Scientists, the National School of Healthcare Science, the Royal College of Pathologists. There's lots of different training schemes, but it's not very clear how they all interrelate and how they all link in. So we'll just briefly go through that. In terms of a trainee position, those of you that know me know I love a good analogy. So whenever someone asks me, how do I get into the field? I compare it to an IVF cycle. You have lots of sperm or people trying to get into the field, which is the trainee embryologists. And in most cases, there's always more sperm than trainee positions. And those ones that get into the egg or into the trainee positions are the andrologists, the ones who have done related research, the lab technicians, even those that work within the clinic as a patient advisor, front of desk. Once they're into that trainee position, they're sort of like an embryo. So you're now in, you're a 2PN, you have a unknown potential to go on and make a great blastocyst or a great embryologist. So they start off at the fertilization stage where everything they do is supervised directly. They learn the ropes. As they become competent in different procedures, they can be signed off of them so they can do egg collections unsupervised and trained. And sort of the gold standard is everyone has to be HCPC registered, or Health and Care Professions Council. That allows you to work unsupervised, that allows you to sign off results. There is a legal requirement for you to be working towards that. And the way to get that is through 4 different routes: the STP, ACS route 2, AHCS equivalents, and the international routes. Then as we progress further, we get the seniors, which are the Morula stage embryos. And before you're getting into the management side or the consultant side, which is your full blastocyst. Now, there's no legal requirement for you to do any of the FRC path or the HSSE or the HSST. That is just down to each individual clinic, whereas the HCPC is a mandatory requirement. And what you sometimes see is you'll have great embryologists get to the HCPC or the 8-cell embryo and then never go into management and just drop out the field, and they never make that blastocyst, similar to an arrested embryo. Sometimes we'll see them transition into seniors, and if they're not given the right culture conditions, they don't make very good blastocysts. And sometimes they just need that culture change or changing to a new clinic just to give them the extra little bit of a kick. In terms of how you actually get into this HCPC registration, the main route is clearly defined, the scientist training program. It's all set by the National Health Service. Each training center has to be accredited. And I think that's why there's not so many STP places. It's a very long and arduous process to actually get a clinic to be registered with them. You know, there's a minimum salary associated with it. It's got an integrated MSc. It's a great program, but not very well funded. So there's generally only around 6 places a year that go up for what we call direct entry, where people can apply for a competitive place. And there's around 50 applications for every single place per place. So quite competitive. And actually I have to give tip my hat to Alison Campbell and the CARE group, because they've done quite a lot of STP positions across their centres this year, where a lot of the other big groups are not doing that. They're doing the ACS or the AHCS. They really needed to pick better abbreviations. The ACS is essentially a 5-year ad hoc program. You know, you basically just gain experience, and then you have to write an 80-page CV and submit it to people like me. And I go, yes, you're experienced enough against some set criteria. The AHCS is what we call STP equivalents. So it's a similar kind of process where you write an extended CV and you map your experiences to that. The problem with that, there is no guaranteed minimum salary. What we see is actually you get employed as a reproductive technologist on, you know, central London on £23,000 a year, which STP is safeguarded at a minimum by what we call band 6, which is about 32,000 a year. So there's also a drop off in people leaving the field because they're not being paid adequately, and certainly not compared to what we used to be paid. You know, when I entered the field many moons ago, my starting salary was 26,000. And people in this day are getting paid 22,000 in central London, just can't afford to live. And the final route is through the international route. So if you're internationally fully trained and you have lots of experience, you don't have to go through all these hoops. Again, it's just an extended CV and you can apply directly to HCPC. So across our group, we have various people doing all 4 programs depending on their own experience and how they want to proceed, just to get that HCPC. Once you've got that HCPC, you're gold dust, essentially. If I advertise for a job and I have one HCPC registered embryologist apply for the job, you can essentially guarantee that they've got it. And if I get two, it's like I'm dreaming, because they're so hard to get now, particularly with all of the original embryologists leaving the fields. And then from when you're at HCPC, it's that step up to senior and consultant level. And it's a case of how do you do this? So there's 3 different programs: RC Path, HSST, HSSE. The HSST is a 5-year program. It's the next sort of follow-on step from the STP. And it's aimed at transferring clinical embryologists to consultant grade, able to run their own centers and make all the decision. There's scientific leadership and all sorts of different things built into it. But again, there's, I think, only about 10 scientists enrolled on the program from all the previous years, and still no one's finished it. There's been multiple people started it and they just run out of steam, haven't been able to do it. RC Path, there is 14 people who have completed both parts of it. HSSE, there are currently 6 who've applied for the equivalence. So instead of doing the 5-year program, they can map their competencies against the criteria. So I've done the RC Path. So I was one of the 14, and the HSSE I've just submitted. So hopefully I will be the 7th. But again, they're talking about making it mandatory for new lab managers to have one of these 3 programs. And that's going to cut down the level of experience even more. You know, we're already struggling to get HCPC registered embryologists. So if you're putting in another hurdle to sort of say you need this and this and this to be a lab manager, it's just bonkers. It should always be experience-based and left down to the individual clinics. And I just want to leave you with the leadership and management thing, what leadership actually is, what people think it is. And you need these programs to show you what leadership actually is and train you how to do it in combination with experience. Because if you have the wrong conditions, the wrong toxic workplace, you end up in the top circle rather than the bottom circle. So there's lots of factors to consider. It's all about upskilling your embryologists, giving them the tools and the experience to learn what they need to do, and, you know, to help inspire the next generation and really leave their legacy.
That's great, Andrew. Thanks very much for that. It seems incredibly complicated for my side of things, but you've made it generally quite clear with those flow diagrams. But we all get loads of emails, a lot of people from abroad saying how can they get into the UK. But before we venture onto that and probably Q&A, how many places for this STP course are there? Because I thought they were incredibly low. So how were they then and how are they now?
Well, historically, there's always been around 6 or 7 what we call direct entries. So
for the whole country, yeah, for the whole of UK.
So you have no one in particular is selected. It's a competitive process. You have to go through external testing, exam questions, a whole interview panel with different stations. The other way to do it is what's called an in-service trainee, where a clinic who's accredited, so like the CRGW group, will put our reproductive technologists through the STP. So they're only competing against themselves. But in terms of the actual to the people that are not employed in an IVF clinic, there's only around 6 or 7 places. Actually, this year, I think there's about 15 or 16, mainly because of the care group. So as I said, round of applause for them.
It's amazing. It's been so low for so long. Thank you again. We'll certainly have a lot more to talk about. There's loads of questions coming up. If we don't get through them today, we can certainly get through them on the second webinar tomorrow. But thank you again for that. That's brilliant. We'll stay in the UK now, and we're going to talk to Dr. Alison Campbell. You may all know Alison as the Group Scientific Director of Care Fertility, the large group of clinics in the UK, and not only. But she's now formed a unique alliance with the university to start a master's course in the UK. Now, this could be a solution that we're looking for. So I'd like to hand it over to Alison, if that's okay.
Thank you very much. Very nice to be here, Giles. And that was a really interesting talk. Well, so far, all of them really fascinating. It's obviously close to my heart, this topic about training and the future generations, so important. And Andrew, I loved your analogy. I'm going to use that one about the developing embryo. It's absolutely perfect. So a key sentiment of this evening's session is that we have a responsibility, I think, to raise awareness of the amazing careers in our field. And just as important as raising awareness is facilitating access to this training, because there seem to be certain hurdles. First, we need to make people aware that these jobs exist and how wonderful careers in our field are. And then we need to help them get in. We need to find those routes for training, and then we need to deliver phenomenal training. So we're fortunate at Care Fertility to have this training facility, and pictured here is dedicated. And so this is really one of the key reasons why we've been able to embrace the STP that we just heard about, and why we've been able to develop the master's course that I'm going to mention over the next few minutes. So yeah, TJ's, no, it wasn't TJ's, teed this up earlier, but somebody teed this up earlier, Bill, perfectly. And I was thinking, oh, yeah, teed up, what another analogy, but I shouldn't mention the Masters golf because England beat the US recently. But yeah, teed up because I think you're right, Bill. We need to raise awareness from a very young age, and probably even younger than the discussion earlier, because children need to know that these careers exist. This picture here is a couple of 15-year-olds who came to our training facility because we like to open it. We want to encourage people to come and see what it's all about and to learn. And I was absolutely thrilled a couple of years ago when I heard that IVF, reproduction and fertility, are now on our GCSE syllabus. So this is the what were the O-level exams, so exams done at the age of about 16. So it's on the syllabus. So we're taught this in our schools now in the UK, and I think that is amazing progress. As well as that, we've got the government initiatives. We've got a lot of support for STEM education, science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. Really important that right across the world, really, that we're raising the importance of these subjects, and of course, particularly close to our hearts, IVF and fertility. I'll just sneak in my own personal story because I think it's a little bit unusual. So I, as a child, was absolutely obsessed with reproduction. And I was breeding canaries in my bedroom. Now, so unhygienic now when I think about it. I don't know how I was allowed to do that, but I was just so fascinated by procreation, by reproduction. I was planting seeds from an early age and just blown away by it. So I was on a mission. I didn't know embryology existed as a career, but until the sixth form, so age 17, 18 in the UK, when somebody came in to talk to us, and it was an embryologist, and he talked about his job. And for me, that was it. I knew that is perfect, it's what I want to do. And I was absolutely on a mission. So that's probably one of the reasons why I find it really important that we try and facilitate young people to get into our field, and also to attract talent, because we want the best people. And you know, we're worried about the very experienced people who are mature and experienced in the field. We worry about them retiring, but we've got to embrace the next generation and hand over all of our knowledge so that they can take it forward. So what we've done, really on a mission and with a shared vision to help develop our future workforce. We at Care Fertility have collaborated with Liverpool John Moores University in the northwest of England to establish a master's degree, an MSc in clinical embryology. So it's starting this autumn. It's been a lot of work. We've had to put the course together and get it validated. It's quite a novel collaboration, I would say. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about it, but it's the concept really of bringing industry and academia together, because for me, that gives us the best of both worlds. So how we operate, the title of this presentation. So it's a collaboration, the university with Care Fertility, so with the industry element, delivering not just the practical training, but the technical postgraduate academic education. So really important that I think that our next generation of embryologists, that all embryologists have a really comprehensive understanding of assisted reproduction technologies. Why are you doing things the way you're doing them? And I think it's really important. Of course, we have support staff, technicians, that maybe it's less important, but I think for the trained embryologists, the academic element can sometimes be overlooked. So we put together a research-led curriculum. We include seminars on all the advances in our field. So we want to keep right up to date. So this syllabus will be moving. And it's the theory and also very practical. We've got the training facility, beautifully equipped laboratory. And so it's hands-on as well in the clinical setting in one of our biggest clinics in the UK. And a lot of the teaching is undertaken by our own professionals. So what are the benefits then really of putting industry with academia and doing a collaboration like this? Well, I think it gives us the best of both worlds. So they get in the academic background that I spoke of, they get a qualification, so they get a master's in clinical embryology. And importantly, the practical training is undertaken by people that do. It's undertaken by our own embryologists. The people involved in the training have now undergone train-the-trainer training so that they can deliver the training in the best possible way. The facility gives the latest equipment, as I said, and they can then shadow patients and shadow staff in our clinic. So very important as well, I think, to be a fully fledged, highly functioning embryologist is having a research mind, have an inquiring mind. So of course, with a master's degree, there's an opportunity to undertake research and really make a difference. So attracting and developing talent in our field, I think it should be easier than it appears to be. First of all, we should be spreading the word. We need to raise awareness. Let's invite people into our laboratories, and of course, in a very cautious way, one at a time, keep a distance, abide by the rules, but see the magic that we're doing. Raising awareness should give us a bigger pond to fish in so that we can really select the best possible talent. We heard about the STP program in the UK. To be quite honest, I am a complete convert. I was highly skeptical a few years ago when it started because I didn't want to have an embryologist arrive that I'd not selected myself. So if you get a direct entry STP student, you just get who you're given. So there's no consideration on team fit. But actually, I accept I was wrong. It works really well. These people are very talented, very intelligent, and we've had so many success stories from really embracing that program. So it's not for everybody, of course, but what we can do as professionals across the world, I think, is work to develop routes and also tools for this education in our discipline and training. So I'm so thrilled to be here tonight to see all the other people thinking the same way and doing similar things, because it is an amazing job, and the more we can do to bring people into our field and develop them, the better. And then the final thing that we need to ensure that we're doing is delivering this high quality training. And so it's not just the practical training, the knowledge, the experience, let's hand it over, let's mentor all the newer embryologists or less experienced than ourselves, and not forgetting those already experienced embryologists who may also want to develop. They may also need opportunities to keep going. So we've heard from Andrew about the system in the UK. There still are places for people to go. There's more that we can do. And so I think I don't look to the future feeling concerned. I feel really positive about the future of our field. I think we just got to pull together and we'll get there. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alison. Great, that's awesome what you're doing. We've probably, through the years, I was 6 years in an IVF lab before I went and got a master's. So I had all the hands-on, I didn't have the book smarts. A lot of people now have the book smarts, but not the hands-on. So it sounds like you're gonna mix it pretty well, which is great. So we're gonna run into an issue we already have, where at least here in the States, where you have a junior embryologist that's already at a clinic, and you train someone at a outside training facility, and then they step in to this clinic. It kind of causes a little rift between the junior embryologist that's there and this new person that has the hands-on. So it gets to be a little bit of, I guess, of a abrasive relationship, so to speak. How do we overcome that until we get more of these master's programs and training centers up by these corporate IVF and IVF field as a whole?
Yeah, difficult one, but I think that has to come down. If we're talking about this competition and sort of bad feeling because someone's come in maybe at a higher pay grade or with different skill sets, people who've been there a long time, it can cause some disruption, but with excellent management and leadership, I think, in the lab, then we can get the best from that situation. And I think healthy competition is a good thing. We can learn from each other. We can try and understand individuals' strengths and weaknesses and get people tasked with different elements of the job, because of course it's very complex. There are loads of things to do both inside and outside of the lab. So I think we have to make the best of the situation. It can be difficult, but we have to try and find the best of it and embrace healthy competition.
Yeah, no doubt. I mean, it's teamwork that gets this done and gets it done successfully. So that's great. We're going to move on. It is my honor to introduce Dr. Tony Anderson. Tony and I kind of grew up in this field, similar paths. We crossed paths in the bovine industry as well as in the clinical human IVF field. I'm shooting too much hot air. So Tony Anderson has long been an inspiration to young embryologists and perhaps one of the first to recognize the need for training centers. He is the founder of many training initiatives and the founder of IVF Academy USA and Embryo Director IVF Academy. Here is Tony.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you, I3, for this opportunity to come speak to everybody all around the world. We've heard a lot of great talks today, and I want to get into, one of the things in the US that just recently came out was, some of the new staffing requirements recommended by ASRM and the SRBT group. And if you weren't understaffed prior to the last version of this, you probably definitely are now. And what I thought was interesting about this paper was they used almost the exact same table and looking at the volume of patients to the number of embryologists you need, but it really only gives examples on the number of retrievals, number of cycles done in the laboratory. And, it doesn't really talk to what you need in the andrology and the endocrine labs. And we use the word embryologist a lot, but, in that we also have andrologists and endocrinology technicians that work in the labs as well. And a lot of labs actually rotate from embryology into those labs. So I just kind of did a couple of numbers. If you did 1,000 IVF cycles, and you can range it from different volumes, but if you did 1,000 IVF cycles, that's at least 1,000 IVF sperm preps. Typically, it's anywhere between 2 to 3 IUI cycles to each IVF cycle, and usually another 2 to 3 new patient visits before they get into some treatment. So if you were going to perform anywhere between 7,000 and 8,000 sperm samples through your andrology lab, how many andrologists do you need? And to talk to the idea of endocrinology laboratory, for that 1,000 IVF cycles, you're probably running anywhere between 20 and 50,000 hormone assays, and those are 7 days a week, 365 days a year. And how many personnel do you need for those laboratories? So they talk a lot about the criteria for that and what number of staffing that we need for the IVF lab, but what do we need to do? And I think as Bill mentioned, I first started the idea of building in a training lab probably almost 10 years ago when I was working on my doctorate degree. And probably before the demand was there. And so it took a little bit of time to get it going, but the demand is here and things are taking off. But I love this comment from Seth Godin. I'm a big fan of what he does. I get a blog email every single day. And it says that if you look onto the web job posting sites, there's millions of jobs, and every single one of them are looking for that top decile of a performing candidate. So if you want somebody that's in the top 10 percentile, that means you're either gonna have to pay more for the expertise and work far harder to retain that sort of skill. And so how does that apply to the embryology labs? We see a lot of postings where they're offering, sign-on bonuses and higher salaries. And one of the things I've always been a fan of, that people don't always work for money, and they look for like quality of life and those kinds of things. And I try to run my labs around that kind of concept. Pay them fairly, give them a good work-life balance, and they'll stay. But what Seth does go into in his comment is, if you're going to build a job that, if you can't find that 10 percentile, then we end up creating jobs that is average, so that the average person can work towards that. Whereas the real differentiator is the attitudes, and I like to refer to these soft skills. The soft skills being, commitment, the compassion, resilience, enrollment in the job, enrollment in the patient care, empathy. A lot of times lab people don't really have a lot of patient interaction, but empathy for what they're working on. And the biggest that I would probably say is the willingness to be coached. And these are the soft skills that he describes in his email. And one of the things that I would say is that you also want your staff to play a role in choosing these people. So I think we heard a lot in our introduction. How did a lot of people get into IVF? And internships was probably one of the most common words that I heard. Not many people said that they were andrologists before moving into embryology. And for me, that's always been the low-hanging fruit for any lab that I've worked in or managed or directed, because a lot of embryologists get into the fertility space and they start out in the andrology lab. Most laboratories that I've worked with, the andrologists will actually rotate, the embryologists will actually rotate through the andrology lab. I really like to operate that way. That way everybody is cross-trained to do everything at any time. But I've had students come through that have actually quit their jobs where they're at, where they've been andrologists for 9 years, and just wanting that opportunity to get into embryology. So to me, if that is in your lab, those if they've already been there and they are good performers and they have those soft skills that we described, to me, that is the first person you should promote into your program. And then the next thing would be internships. I've always liked to offer paid internships. You tend to get a little better intern that way. I've offered internships to schools where it's required for that student to do an internship before they graduate. I tend to find those are not the best interns, whether they're paid or unpaid. They feel like they're just doing it for the credit in school and really aren't engaged in it. A lot of people actually will get into the internships and be engaged, and because I typically try to get someone who in the internship who already qualifies to do andrology, which is in the US is a minimum of 24 hours of science, including 6 hours of chemistry. And so typically by the end of their sophomore year into their first junior year, they will qualify for that. And by the end of the summer, they're actually performing semen analysis, performing IUI preps. And you can actually find a lot of your rock stars in that. I actually posted a job one time that, and I learned this from a book called To Sell is Human. And it said, when you're looking for great candidates, don't advertise for, you're searching for the rock star, and when they come in and apply, ask them why they think they're a rock star. No matter what they say, you want them to, you want to say that I'm just not hearing rock star. And it's that person that comes back to you and says, if you don't hear rock star in this, then I probably don't want to work here. That's going to be your perfect person. I actually have tried that. I haven't had a lot of people apply that way, but I still like to ask that question in my interview. I mentioned in my video where I actually came from the animal world. It's actually a lot harder to recruit people from the animal world. And I don't know if it, as I mentioned also, they're also paid a little better than when I was there. But when I got into humans, it was real easy to get a bump in pay. But one of the challenges is when they're in the animal, they work really hard, just as I was and Bill was as well. And so I think they get even burned out faster, and they feel I have actually a person that came from a mouse injection lab in my training lab right now, and I can tell she's had some of the very same kind of feedback where you don't want to get into humans, it's too complicated, and you can tell she's very nervous about it. But now that we've had some more students, short-term students come through, and that's what we're offering. We actually offer anywhere between 1 day and 5-day courses depending on what you're doing. We also offer long-term courses with 2 months. And we also include some clinical rotations through a lab that I'm partnering in. And so when we bring those people into the training lab, just because you want to, you're bringing them in, do they really want to be an embryologist? You don't really want them to spend the time and the money on something and then find out they don't want to do that. I discovered this early in my career where I had some people, I would train them 1 or 2 years, and then they would decide to go back to school and be a PA, or go back to school and get into psychology, or I had one person become a painter, and to each their own. But after they're going to spend the time and the commitment to that, what is it that they're looking for? So I usually start with a 5-year plan, and we have a saying around our office: satisfaction equals performance minus expectations. So we get the idea of where do they want to be? Where do you expect to be your first job when you're hired? Most of these, new graduates from college, they went to college with the ideas of what they were going to do, and maybe aren't going that direction. So if I can meet those expectations in the beginning, where do you want to be in 5 years? Both, professionally, financially, and personally, and help get them there. The real buy-in that we have to have, just because the lab director, lab manager wants these things for the candidate, we also need to get buy-in from our financial people and our medical directors, because you can't get the typical 3% raise per year and go and have an increase in $30,000 in pay over that 5-year period. And then the real challenge is, where do you want to go with that after 5 years, and keeping them engaged? Because typically somebody is, I saw somebody put it perfectly, within the first year, most everybody can be fully trained and know how to do the skills. It takes another 5 years, and the reason why I say 5 years, 3 to 5 years, because I'm a big fan of the 10,000 hour rule. After you've done something for 10,000 hours, you should be the expert, and I would call that your, as TJ mentioned, an embryologist 3 or a senior embryologist. And at that point, you should, be able to troubleshoot. And then the real challenge is keeping them engaged. So when I first built the program, I actually, like I said, it was almost 10 years ago. I was working on my doctorate degree. I thought, well, if I build it, they will come. And, I was just kind of doing it as a side hustle. Had 1 micro station, 1 stereoscope, and nobody came. I thought, well, if I build a website, they'll come. And, you send out an email, global email. You have to build trust in people. And so it was, the real challenge was, back then, there really wasn't a shortage of embryologists. So everybody was saying, well, I'll just train them myself. And so over the time, I've been collecting data and putting out things together. But the real challenge also was financing. You know, these young kids coming out of school with already, you know, a mountain of school debt, some of them anywhere as, you know, 20,000, I've had as high as 100,000. How can they afford some more education? So I started a program is an income sharing agreement. And you can actually use this for both the short-term courses and the 2-month courses. There's no interest in it. And there's actually no upfront cost to the student. And this is where I have skin in the game, in the sense of I'm confident enough in the training that I can get them employed. You know, over the, you know, 30 years of my career, I've established relationships with people where I can put resumes in front of people and encourage anybody to reach out to me whenever they're looking for people and send them the resumes as I get them. But I also guarantee a minimum salary. If there's not a minimum salary in this, then they do not have to pay anything until they're exceeding that salary. And so, and if at any point during the time after they get they're employed and they're unemployed, the payments would stop. And if I can't get them employed for within a year's time frame, then all the training was free. So far, we have 100% employment, and nobody's been unemployed since then. So what it is I actually, when they're coming into this, I try to set the expectation of what it is, you know, what IVF is, what embryology is, and even ask them to hang out for a while just before they actually sign on to it. And one of the greatest advantages of this is that, you know, some of these new graduates coming out of school, the cost of the training program, their first job usually in that first year will exceed what they actually paid for the program. So somebody come out of school with no experience, their base would be at a base rate. Typically, when I can give them a 2 months experience, they will start out at a higher base pay. So the real question was, does the training work? And that's what I've been trying to prove. I believe I'm the first program to show that a short-term training program for ICSI. I'm actually got a couple of abstracts that I'm submitted. This was published at PCRS this year, where I compared the data to control embryologists from one of my IVF laboratories, where I had 12 trainees go back to their laboratories and report back to me their fertilization rates and blastocyst conversion rates for the first 100 oocytes, then after 100 oocytes. And you can see here from the table that the control embryologist had, you know, 77% fertilization rate, 52% blast conversion rate. And let's compare that to the first 100 oocytes those embryologists injected had a 75%, no difference, fertilization rate, and almost a 60% blast conversion rate, and with no significant difference between the two. But the question was, would their fertilization rate greatly improve after 100 oocytes? And so here we had over 20,000 oocytes injected with equivalent fertilization rates to the control as well as their first 100, and, you know, equivalent blastocyst conversion rate. So surprisingly, and I believe Eva even mentioned in her program in 5 days, they'll inject over 100 injections. And that I actually say that all the time, that it's surprising once they have the basics down, the injections actually will come fairly easy, and they can make the mistakes in the training lab and then go back to their lab. I would also say that when they go back to their lab, they don't really need to be doing any more practicing. They really need to get in some hands-on. And that's been one of the challenges I've had. Like when they go back, they've already done enough practice. I would say the equivalent of 6 months worth of practicing with your 30 minutes to an hour in your IVF lab in a 2-day course. The most recent submission I have is on blastocyst biopsy. I had a lot of feedback where embryologists, when they would do first training, they would have, you know, higher rates of mosaicism and higher rates of no reads. So I thought, well, let's gather some data and see and compare it to a control embryologist from my IVF lab. And you can see here the first 50 embryos that the embryologist biopsied had a 63% euploidy rate, which I don't believe that the embryologist has an impact on euploidy, but they do have an impact on the no read rate. And, you know, did they have an impact on mosaicism? And you can see from the graph here that their overall overall biopsies had no difference in the no reads and the mosaicism. So I'm excited to be, one of the first programs to show that the data with the short-term training course can actually be effective. And the real key to this is the time to competency. Our goal in between the West and Art Lab and I know all the labs care fertility, embryo tools in Europe there, is to get them to competency faster. And so and I think we're all doing a great job at that. But I want to tell you a little story about this guy that I just saw, Simon Sinek. I actually love his TED Talks. I like his book. You got to start with why. Very good speaker. But he tells the story, and I believe it's a true story, that he was at a Four Seasons hotel in Vegas, Las Vegas. And, he said that anybody can put a nice mattress in a hotel. It doesn't matter if it's a Motel 6 or Four Seasons. And he noticed that as he went around, everyone was like, hey, saying hello. And they felt like it was a genuine hello. How are you doing today? And he went down to a barista, got a coffee, and he said, and then noticed this young man named Noah was just the same way, just like, and he says, can I ask you a question? He says, what is it with everybody? He goes, he said, do you love your job? He goes, I love my job, without hesitation. And he says, well, why do you love your job? And without hesitation, he goes, because I feel appreciated. He goes, every day my managers come by, not just my manager, but all the managers will come by and ask how he's doing. Is there anything that he needs? And he said through that, he feels the freedom to be himself and be engaged in his work. He says, interestingly, I also work at Caesar's Palace. Where at Caesar's Palace, he really doesn't care for his job. He says they try to lay low. He goes, I'm just trying to get a paycheck, because anytime his manager comes by, it's always trying to point out the things that he's doing wrong. And so one of the things I think someone had mentioned, like somebody just maybe not flourishing in where they're at, that, maybe if people are leaving jobs going somewhere else. What I really hate is in the embryology world, when you see an embryologist going from one lab to another lab. To me, that's like a net zero gain for that community. We're still not serving our customers, our clients, our patients. And so, you could have the same person, you could have a Noah. And so if, which Noah do you want? The Noah of the Four Seasons or the Noah of Caesar's Palace? And if people are leaving, maybe it's not so much that people are offering them more money, but, maybe it's the leadership. So I think we should point the fingers back at ourselves and say, how can we engage our employees and make their jobs more satisfied? So with that, I would like to thank everybody.
Thank you, Tony. That was a great talk. And I totally 100% agree with you. I always employ on attitude and how much I think they'll fit in with the team. You can't teach attitude. I've just got one question, and that's about the ASRM staff calculator and what your honest opinion of it is. Because I'm probably going to get shot for saying this, but actually I think it might have gone the other way and is now too generous. For my lab, the calculator tells me I need around 9 embryologists, but I quite comfortably do it with 6.2. So I just wondered, is the calculator fit for your program, and what your thoughts were on it?
I think those numbers aren't far off. I think that, we used to say, and there's always been recommendations by, SART and ASRM. There's really no really hard set criteria, but I used to say that we used to be able to do 150 to 200 cases, retrievals. I call a case per embryologist. But when we started doing all the freeze-alls and stopped doing fresh transfers and all the PGT on 80, 90, 100% of our cases, it really changed the dynamic. So kind of as a rule of thumb, I would say 1 embryologist for every 100 cycles. But one of the things that we should also consider, and Eva spoke to this, is the sense that an embryologist that is inputting data is probably the highest paid data entry clerk in the center. And, and if we could find technologies that work with the EMRs, we should implement those and hire people that can help with these things to take some of that burden off. So if you can do it at 6.5, that probably means you're doing your well-oiled machine and probably have the right people doing the right jobs. And just my thoughts to that.
Yeah, I got a great team. Props to them. And sorry, let me speak English. Ruthless efficiency is our motto.
Lean management.
So it's my great pleasure to introduce one of the greats, an entrepreneur and leading scientist, Nuno Costa Borges, who together with Gloria Calderon created Embryo Tools, a powerhouse of research, quality management services, and top training in so many countries around the world. Over to you, Nuno.
So hello, everyone. And thank you, Andrew, for this introduction. I'd like to thank also I3 for giving us this opportunity to join you today. And we've been asked to explain briefly why Spain is considered a reference country in IVF, in the IVF field, and also why we see many colleagues, Spanish embryologists, working abroad in many different countries in Europe and all over the world. So we've been proposed this title by Giles, and I think it summarizes quite well what we're going to talk today, and also what is happening in terms of the shortage that we've been discussing along this session, in terms of the shortage of embryologists and how the Spain has been a source of embryologists to cover these needs at the moment. So as it has been explained, together with Dr. Gloria Calderon, we are stockholders of Embryo Tools. We have a training center where we provide IVF courses, personalized hands-on courses for embryologists. But I think within the context of this talk, we don't have many conflicts of interest to disclose. So when we think first about Spain, usually it comes to our minds that it's a very nice country where the weather is good, we have nice beaches, the food is fantastic. It's close to even a nicer country, Portugal, my hometown. But within this context tonight, we need to think also that seriously Spain has been considered a reference country within the IVF field. And this is because the numbers are there. Spain at the moment is the largest European country in terms of number of cycles that are done annually, and the fourth country globally. Looking some years ago, there was an increase of about 50% in terms of number of cycles that are done at the moment. At the moment we're in numbers above 150,000 cycles per year. And this has been joined by a sharp increase in number and the quality of IVF cycles. And it's true that some important world-leading art corporations are originally from Spain, like EV Group or iGenomics. In terms of the type of patients that are treated, about 30% of the art cycles are done in patients over 40 years of age, and within these cycles, over 50% represent oocyte donations. Actually, Spain has been considered a reference country for egg donations, and more than half of the egg donations that are done in Europe are done here in Spain. So it's common that we see patients coming from abroad for being treated with oocyte or embryo donation. This is explained essentially because there was a change in the law that regulates our procedures here in Spain, and at the moment the law that is in place is one of the most liberals in Europe, which means that we are able to offer treatments that in some countries are still not possible. For example, for single women, we can treat them. We can treat also patients that are under 50 years of age. As I explained, oocyte and sperm donation programs are quite robust and they're still anonymous, which is attractive for some patients. And in terms of more advanced techniques like PGT, we've been applying these techniques in several years, and the techniques are well regulated under the law, and whenever there's a medical indication, they can be applied. But this doesn't mean that we can do everything. Of course, there's a regulation, a strict regulation, actually. And for example, sex selection is not allowed unless there are medical reasons. And for example, surrogacy is forbidden. This increase in terms of number of cycles has been joined with an increase in number of clinics as well. We know that there's IVF centers in public hospitals, but the vast majority of centers are private. Over 250 clinics are private in Spain. And these clinics, these private clinics are the responsible of about 75% of the cycles that are done here, and most of them are most of the egg donation or PGT cycles are covered by these private centers. Most of the clinics are located in attractive destination, which means that they are easily accessible by plane to foreigners. And usually, overall, I think the oocyte donation cycles are quite good in terms of results, and patients are usually happy with the treatment they receive here in the Spanish clinics. Of course, this increase in number of cycles and number of clinics comes together with the need for well-educated people, well-educated, in our case, embryologists. And these needs have been covered with the senior embryologists that have been in the field for many, many years, the first generation of embryologists that have been in charge of educating the younger embryologists. And in most cases, the most important centers understood that that it was important to offer good educational programs. And since several years, they have implemented, or they've been offering master programs associated with universities, which combine both theoretical and practical programs. Actually, these courses are usually offered to university graduates in different life sciences disciplines, and who usually wish to acquire a knowledge in human reproductive biology, and thus do these private or public master programs, and have the chance of spending some months in the clinics that collaborate with the university where the masters is offered. Usually, these training, these master programs have very attractive, lessons that are covered by lecturers. In some cases, are international references, and this allows the students to not just to get in touch with the clinics, but also to have direct access to embryologists that are in charge of doing research, of doing clinical cases, and getting to know well what our profession involves, And since the beginning, they can have clear whether they are interested in our job or not. In most cases, in some cases, these students, when they finish the master's program, are able to find a job within the clinic where they've been doing the practical part of the master program. However, of course, there's not so many places for all students, and there's thousands of them that every year finish the master degree with good theoretical knowledge and some practical experience. However, as we've seen, they're not lucky on finding a job in the country, and then they're forced to find or look for a job in other countries. So this is why Spain has been considered a good source of embryologists to other countries, because since several years, many students have been doing master programs specific in clinical embryology. However, when they finish the program, in some cases they are not able to find a job, and because they are committed on finding a position within this field, they do whatever is needed to start a career. And in most cases, they need to find a position abroad. It's common that we find embryologists in the UK, in Ireland, in Switzerland, or even in Norway, which certainly has completely different weather conditions than what they can find here in Spain. But this means that they are very committed on pursuing a career in clinical embryology. Actually, in some cases, they are also able to return to Spain to get also some individual programs in our facility, as it has been the case with some embryologists, Spanish embryologists that are working abroad but want to enlarge their practical experience with us. So with this, I would finish my talk, and if you have any questions, we'll be happy to answer.
Thank you very much for that excellent talk, and in fact a great challenge to my title which I gave you, because I think Spain has done a fantastic thing about nurturing young embryologists. I think younger than most countries, and I've had the experience of working with some of the younger staff, and they seem to come in at entry level, but they seem to be highly skilled already and have a fantastic work ethic. So that's fantastic. So well done to you there. Just one quick question before we go into the Q&A. There's a lot of questions here, which shows what a hot topic this is. Do many of them are they going abroad to do further, to the further experience, and then they are returning to Spain? So have you seen many that are now, returning, because of course the crisis perhaps is slowly ending now, and there's some more jobs going? So are you seeing now an influx of let's say homegrown people but have trained outside?
Yeah, that's a good question. In general, and from time to time, of course, we register that some Spanish embryologists that have been abroad for some years are lucky to find a job in Spain and return. However, I'd say that in most cases, in the end they like the profession. They get used to the place where they are working, and in the end they stay in the clinic where they started, where they had the opportunity to start their job.
Sure.
I guess within the next years, because the prediction is that the number of cycles and clinics will still grow, and there will be needs for experienced embryologists, and for sure they can have some opportunity to return to Spain.
Excellent.
if they
to
wish.
the sun again, to the sun
Exactly.
again. Brilliant.
Exactly.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Now, before I go to the Q&A, all of the people that have the training centres will be talking tomorrow, but also on the 100th event that we have lined up. So on the 28th of this month, we have like a networking session, and there's going to be plenary scientific talks as well. But there are going to be breakout rooms, so you can in fact talk to all the people here you've met who've got training courses, which I think would be actually fantastic. So if you can join us, that'll be absolutely great. It's on for 8 hours, so I think you can squeeze in the time to see it. So can I open this up? I'm going to ask the first question, and then I'm going to leave it to the other resident moderators. A question for Alison, I think. Is Alison there? Alison there. So you've just started, or you're going to start in September, this this course. Well, there has been recently a master's course which is closed, much to a lot of bewilderment. You know, how does that affect really, you know, the UK scene of embryologists? And that question was from Monica Bauer, if I'm saying that correctly, who was a trainee from Nottingham. So could you say, you know, how that fits into your narrative of getting people to, you know, to come to the training session?
Yeah, well, it's just closed. I've only quite recently found out, and it's actually the world's first master's degree in assisted technology, which is the one I did. I was the second intake, and I think it was in 1995. So yeah, it's really sad, really disappointing. I don't know the details, and that wasn't part of our strategy when we developed our own master's course. We had no idea that that would be closing down. You know, we did an analysis, and we realized there was a shortfall. So now the shortfall is going to be even bigger if that master's course is no longer available. So yeah, demand is going to increase further, I would say.
Yeah, but then you've like joined forces with, you know, with the university, which of course is again unique in the UK. Right, I'm going to shut up. Right, Andrew, how about you? How about you start?
I had a question for TJ. So one of my friends and colleagues, Sophie Bird, asks about locum embryologists or per diem embryologists, and how do they fit into this issue of shortages, and how many labs would actually hire a locum to allow a more senior member of staff time to take a day off or a week off. You know, you're having a extra pair of hands there, but you know, as Giles says, you're cooking in someone else's kitchen. How do you feel about hiring locums? Or open to the floor, really. Bill?
Yeah, you still with us?
What about you, Bill? What's your opinion on locums?
Per diems, I used per diems for a while. They're good. It seems that here in the US, a lot of senior embryologists are choosing to do per diem work these days. So you're actually getting a well-trained senior person with a great background in your labs. My preference is, if I can, is to hire enough staff in my lab, not to use per diems, just to keep consistency and those types of things. But I have no problem using them. They are widespread in this country here in the US. So, and there's a big transition to all these senior people going to per diem. It's just a better lifestyle for them. So that's what they're moving to.
How does it work in the US with sort of when someone resigns? Like if someone gave me a resignation tomorrow, they have to do a 3-month notice period. But by the time you sort of let the clinic directors know, and then the position to be re-advertised agreed, and for HR to publish it, and then time for recruitment and time to the interview and the times to actually recruit them, from when someone resigns to me filling that post is probably about 6 months. How different is that in the US?
No, that's a great point. However, we don't have that written, at least we don't here have that written in contracts. Would we like that? We would love that. Most of the people in the field, especially that have been around a while, they're going to give you that time. They're going to give you that notice. It's probably the newer ones that are going to jump ship quicker for a better, more lucrative deal down the road in certain, cities that there's high competition. You don't get that. You'd like at least a month. Here in this, I guess in this country, it's really 2 weeks. is essentially acceptable or not really acceptable for us, but you know, they can get away with giving 2 weeks notice and they're done.
And then how long does it take you to fill that post?
Well, it's a great question. Sometimes it's you can turn it right around and flip it pretty quickly, and sometimes you do have to wait months or even a year. You might have to go through more than one applicant just to make sure they fit in well with the personalities on the team and stuff. So you don't want to jump right in. You want your team involved to kind of vet these people to make sure, one, that the person you're interviewing is happy with, you know, the team that she's going to join or he's going to join, and vice versa. Is the team happy with this person? I think it's wrong for just the lab director to make the decision on bringing someone in without sharing with your team. I don't know if TJ's still on. I had a question for TJ as well. So let me go through here. I did see one question for Alison. Alison, is your master's course 1 or 2 years?
It's 1 year full time.
Sounds great. I don't know where that's from. I passed that somewhere.
That's okay. We've got so many questions. And of course, we've got tomorrow as well, which will probably mop up a lot of questions there. Next session will, of course, we'll go into more details, as you heard from Andrew, talk about contracts, leaving, non-competitive contracts, and all that kind of small print as it is. But Gloria, would you like to ask a question?
This is a question for Alison, and it's made from Iris Martinez Rodero, and he says, I noticed in your photos that all of them were girl trainees. Do you think there is a gender bias towards girls in IVF? What percent are male? Are females better?
Good question. Be careful.
I added the last bit. Okay, it was a very good question, but you know, multitasking. Let's give that hot potato to Alison there.
Yeah, thanks for that. Well, absolutely, we do see much more demand from female trainees. We have actually we got 14 labs, and one of the teams has more males than females, so quite unusual. But the rest, absolutely, the girls outnumber the boys by far. And that's really just because we get less applications from boys. There's no particular selection strategy. Yeah, it takes a particular type of person, irrespective of whether they're male or female or anything else. It's, you know, it's a wonderful job, and the skill set is broad and specific, and you know, we just want the best people.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. So let's see, because the audience has placed more questions. Let me see. I would like, to TJ.
I'm not sure if he's here actually, but we can pass on those questions. But I'm not sure he's here, or he may join us later.
Okay, then let me check. For Andrew Thomson, Laura Pineda from Boston. Why should embryologists be in competition with each other? Also, besides the independent training programs, don't forget about those in academic master's program. Well, it's enough just with why should embryologists be in competition with each other?
I'm trying to think how I can phrase this politically correctly. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. I trained in a very, very competitive lab. Generally, there was 2 or 3 trainees all started at the same time. and whoever completed the first technique first got onto the second technique before everyone else, and no one was allowed to move on to that technique till that person. So there became a hierarchy of competition.
Yeah.
And it was great because it made you better. It made you want to compete. However, you are breeding into that person a really competitive and alpha nature, and it can be very volatile. And nearly all of us who trained in that lab run labs now. It makes a very specific person. Having said that, when I left that field, when I finished my training, I went to the complete opposite. Trainees supported each other and helped each other with work. And it was very strange, and it took a little bit of adjustment. So I can see both parts of it. Sometimes, as I said, sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. It takes very, very strong leadership to manage those kind of egos and attitudes and how you mix them together. So it's an interesting concept. And I think if you don't have a strong tight fist on it, then you're in for some fireworks, and particularly not having favorites.
Yes, completely agree with your answer.
I think that's about as PC as I can put it.
Perfect. So I pass it to the next moderator to place more questions.
Very good. I have one here from Seun from Nigeria. Are there motivational means to keep the increase in trainees? For example, is there scholarship programs for trainees? So that's probably to anybody. Tony, you have somewhat of a format that doesn't charge, or gives the students a little bit of a break if things don't work out.
Yeah, I actually get a lot of inquiries from or just Africa in general, India, Pakistan, and the ISA. I mean, there are some criteria you have to have. You have to have a U.S. bank account, U.S. Social Security number. So you don't have to be a U.S. citizen. I've had people come through that are international, that are not citizens but have ability to be in the U.S. But that's why I created an online version of what I do. Is basically the exact same thing as what you would get when you're in-house, and then you can work in your own lab. It's a way for me to reach out to these other countries. But I actually have had some people from Nigeria and Uganda. And what's interesting is, and I think it's challenging for the U.S. vendors, like Cooper or iGenomics or something like that, because they can't fund something to people in the U.S. But a lot of people in Africa, I found, they spend a lot of time at ESHRA and going to European meetings because they can get sponsors and scholarships to those meetings and things. So maybe if those same institutions would sponsor them to come to the U.S., they could get some training there as well. The challenge is getting into the U.S. That's the rate limiting step.
Yeah, just to add to that, within the U.S., we kind of are relying on industry and these new corporate IVF centers to probably find these trainees in their own area where they need to hire. It's easy to place people in big cities. It's hard to place people out in the so-called boonies, so to speak, small cities. So we kind of rely on those people to find someone and then maybe make a contract with a potential trainee of some type of scholarship. So those things do exist out there.
Oh, I've got a question for the floor. We've sort of focused on getting people into the field and getting them up to speed with the training, but I'm sure it's the same in America. You have a lot of the original embryologists retiring, and particularly in the UK, I've never seen so many lab directors' jobs up at the same time, and massively established programs that aren't able to fill those positions because they don't have the people there to fill those shoes. How do we address that issue? How do we teach the leadership and management, or do we just take a punt on someone and hope for the best?
Well, I think, if I can jump in, I was fortunate to be able to complete my PhD while I was an embryologist. So in one of the new programs here in the US that affords that opportunity. So one is, I think we need to try to focus on kind of our really superstar embryologists that may not have a PhD, and potentially try to mentor them and realize that there are now pathways to move up to at some point be a lab director. But I think there's also an assumption that if you call somebody a lab director, that somehow they've been born with these innate skills to be able to manage. And I think that's something that we probably need to address too, is how to be a lab director, how to be a leader, how to be a mentor. So you're not driving, some of your embryologists away. Tony, Bill, I don't know what your thoughts on that, in the US, but one of the big things I'm seeing here now, at least, is, like you said, big programs that are having to operate with offsite directors. So now you've completely lost, kind of direction. You got even more stress, on your lab.
Yeah. Great points there. I think you have to have a succession plan. I mean, I don't think we thought about this until now. So I think, these, whether you're a boutique or a corporate IVF, you have to come up with a succession plan for your exit.
Yeah. Well, and how many, I'd argue on that though, how many times have I heard that, programs don't want to hire PhD level embryologists to bring them in because of that fear that this person might someday, be after their job or that kind of thing. But I sometimes find it harder for PhD level embryologists to get a job in this field, because once they do have training, if you're not leaving, they could potentially go elsewhere and be a lab director.
Now, yeah, you shouldn't be afraid. Again, I am a non-PhD. I've had several PhDs in my lab, and I currently have one who hopefully will be my successor. So don't fear people that are, smarter than you or anything like that. Help each other.
I also think going into the future, very much like these training programs, embracing it, and I think we spoke today about some of the masters that come out with a didactic education, but not the hands-on. So we're trying to supplement some of those things. I actually did my doctorate degree before Eva's program was opened, and then applied to take my HCLD and was denied. So, the question is, even though there are other 8 people with HCLDs from the exact same program, why did they deny mine? I've applied twice and they keep denying it. Maybe they need to change some of those criteria. My research was nominated for a prize paper at ASRM. Is it the board that approves them? And then another thing is that, people are taking these exams, and from what I understand is it's already set up for a 70% failure rate. So if everybody did 75, 80%, then 70% of those people are going to have to fail and take the exam again. In any class I've ever taken, if you got 70% or better, that was passing. And so, maybe we need to change some of those ideas and rethink how we're, credentialing some of the people, and looking into that and what is acceptable. In Canada, you don't even have to have a degree to do embryology. It's just different criteria, and they do very well.
Sign me up. No, that's great. I think we want to wrap things up today, since we have another session tomorrow, and we're just past 2 p.m. here on the West Coast. So we're a couple hours in. So again, we would like to thank all who took part in this RBMO live webinar, I3 webinar. Special shout out to my co-hosts Giles, Gloria, and Andrew. All the speakers who Eva, TJ, Andrew, Alison, Tony, and Gloria. We're going to hear more from TJ and Tony tomorrow, as well as others, including my beautiful wife, Debbie. So please tune in again tomorrow. Again, our sponsors were Care Fertility, Embryo Director, IVF Academy USA, Art Lab Consultancy, West World Embryology Skills and Training, Inception Fertility, and Embryo Tools. And not forgetting our support from I3, thanks to the organizing committee who do an unbelievable job. This is the first one I've done, and they tie it up and hand you this stuff in a nice bow. So these are the people behind the scenes, in front of the scenes. Giles, you're part of it, even though you're not listed here. But thanks to the organizing committee of this initiative, I3, who are Jacques Cohen, Peter Naj, Vicky Almela, and Marianne Cervantes. Hopefully I got that sort of right, Marianne. And of course, Thomas Elliott. And this session has to give a special thank you to Hazel the dog, who was non-stop photobombing. So we appreciate Hazel.
We were worried about the kids. We were worried about the kids coming down the stairs, but we didn't think about the dog, did we? That was it. Now,
he found it quite intriguing. He kept stopping and watching. So
it was amazing, amazing. Stay tuned, because we've got one last origin story. Now, tomorrow we've got another two to see how people stumbled on embryology. Okay, but again, thank you all for being with us. Now, don't forget, tomorrow we've got our second part of the story. We've talked a little bit about succession. We're going to talk about again. We're going to talk about at times which is good for other people. So people obviously sometimes can't see it at the 3 p.m. Eastern time. So we're changing it for everyone. It's 11 p.m. Eastern if you want to stop up late, 8 p.m. Pacific time. Now, the next day on Thursday, the 23rd, it's 8:30 in India and 1 p.m. in the afternoon in Australia. We've got an Australian speaking as well. So we're going to now show another one of these origin stories. And don't forget, tomorrow with contracts and more. Take it away, Marianne.
When I was looking for jobs, I would go and get the New Scientist magazine. I'd actually stay in the news agent and read the back pages to see all of the jobs that were available. And I found that embryology job was something that popped up quite regularly. Embryology is a very cool and exciting science at the time, and it still is. I started to get the interest. Embryology was always on the news. There was always wonderful stories about the science, the patients, and the technology, and that really drew me to it.
How I found embryology: I was an animal science student at UC Davis, and I was working as a nutrition intern. Next door to our nutrition laboratory was the IVF laboratory, and all the cool people worked there. So I thought I'd check it out one day, and ended up getting an internship at the IVF lab the next semester. First time I walked into that lab, I heard the angels singing and knew this was my calling.
I, like Debbie, was an animal science major at university, and my first job out of college was in the animal science industry in cattle embryo transfer. And 5 years into that, I had a university colleague and someone that I did my first job with, Leslie Weicker, introduced me to the human IVF field. And secretively, I thank her every day. So thanks, Leslie.
So hi, my name is Christina, and I learned about embryology when I was doing my master in health biology. I didn't really have too much information while I was doing my degree in biology. It was actually my master. So the master that I did, it was kind of not too specific into embryology. It was kind of general, and one of my subjects touched a little bit on embryology, and I thought it was really interesting. So since in my master I had to do an internship, I contacted a fertility clinic in Madrid, to be able to do that internship with them. So I spent a few months with them as a trainee, and I really liked the job. I thought it was really interesting. And that's basically how I decided that I wanted to become an embryologist. And when I finished my traineeship with them, then I decided to do a specific master in reproduction. And then from then is where I just went to do more traineeship until I get this job. Yeah.
My name's Emily. I'm also an embryologist. When I first heard about embryology, it was in a genetics module in my undergrad as part of biomedical science, and it was one lecture that we had, and my lecturer was talking about the chicken and the egg, and then went on to talk about IVF. And it was when he was talking about IVF that I was like, oh, people actually do that for a job. So it was like a very short half an hour where I was like, oh, actually that could be quite interesting. But it was actually a good friend of mine who decided that she wanted to go down the route of embryology. And she didn't end up pursuing it, but because she kind of kept talking about embryology and kind of kept my interest, I then decided actually that's what I wanted to do. And then I was driven enough to pursue it. I got some work experience at a fertility clinic just to see what the job actually entailed day to day. And from that day, I decided that it's what I really wanted to do.
My name is Rose Lane from Nigeria. I'm currently an embryologist working in my fertility clinic here in Nigeria. I studied cell biology and genetics in school at the University of Lagos. We were taught the course molecular biology and also genetics, where I got to be interested in ART, the assisted reproductive techniques, embryo development, how human being was able to, develop through scientific means or scientific help, and got to know about embryology. And luckily for me, I finished with a first class, the best graduating student in my school. That was where I got to know about the fertility clinic where I work presently. They offered some kind of reward or award for the best graduating students in my school. And there I was able to know about fertility clinic. After my service, my youth service, I went to the fertility clinic to request for the job, and I got it.
I graduated in 2014 and I didn't know what to do. I knew that I did not want to go into a lab that studies basic hematology or microbiology. So I then asked around. I asked my seniors who have graduated the year before me. And I chatted with one of them. She's an embryologist. So I then searched around online for any jobs in my state, and I managed to find one. It was a pretty easy way for me to get into it. I interviewed for my first embryology job and I got it.
I studied microbiology and thought I wanted to become a microbiologist, but after a number of aborted jobs due to being made redundant, I thought that I needed to find new areas of science where scientists were a little bit more in control. I started off my life in reproductive biology, working in a diagnostic andrology service, a very dedicated and high-powered service, and was fortunate to get some great training from exceptional people such as John Aitken up in Edinburgh at the time. I then decided to train in embryology and had an excellent opportunity when working at Nurture, and that's where my life changed from just sperm to sperm, eggs, and then embryos, and became an embryologist. So very lucky in the 90s to have the opportunities to train with excellent people and be the person I am now, and have the opportunities that I have now.